it's a great privilege to have with us this evening Marie Dennis, who is a senior advisor at Pax Christi International in New York. Another advantage of having a Zoom meeting. We're going to hand over to Marie now, who's going to tell us a bit about what Pax Christi International has been up to recently on the nuclear weapons issue. Marie, over to you.
Thank you very much, Russell. It really is a delight to be with all of you, even virtually. I have known of your work for decades, and I am really honored to be here. I know among you, there are probably, there's certainly many who could give this little presentation better than I can, but I'm very glad to be with you. I was asked to say a few words about what the Vatican has been doing on nuclear weapons, especially in the context of the TPNW, about the role that Pax Christi has been playing, and about prospects for future developments. So I will try to do that. First, the Vatican. For all of us in the Catholic Church who have been working for nuclear abolition, for an end to the doctrine of deterrence as an excuse for maintaining, even upgrading nuclear arsenals, these have been very satisfying years, although they were a very long time in coming. From the beginning of the nuclear age, as you know, the Catholic Church called for nuclear disarmament and decried any, quote, act of war aimed indiscriminately against whole populations. But for a very long time, the Vatican was more ambivalent about a defensive posture based on nuclear deterrence. In his encyclical Pacem in Terris from so many years ago, 1963, Pope John XXIII was quite clear, rejecting military force and the, quote, so-called peace methodology of nuclear deterrence. He said that nuclear weapons had to be banned, and that would require a realization that true and lasting peace among nations could not consist in the possession of equal supply of armaments, but only in mutual trust. A few years later, the Catholic bishops at the Second Vatican Council engaged in a very intense debate about war and peace, and in particular, about the indiscriminate nature of nuclear weapons and the moral legitimacy of nuclear deterrence. In the final document of the Second Vatican Council, Gaudium et Spes, the Council clearly and without qualifications again condemned, quote, any act of war aimed indiscriminately at the destruction of entire cities or existing areas along with their population, but it stopped short of condemning nuclear deterrence because some regarded deterrence as, quote, the most effective way by which peace of a sort can be maintained between nations at the present time. Some years later, during the UN Special Session on Disarmament in 1982, Pope John Paul II encouraged every effort toward disarmament, but reiterated that in current conditions, quote, deterrence based on balance, certainly not an end in itself, but as a step on the way toward a progressive disarmament, may still be judged morally acceptable. That was in essence repeated in the US Catholic Bishops' Peace Pastoral, The Challenge of Peace in 1983, and remained unchanged for 30 more years until Pope Francis began to question any moral justification for nuclear deterrence. In a December 2014 message to the Vienna Conference on the Humanitarian Consequences of Nuclear War, the Holy See wrote, quote, now is the time to affirm not only the immorality of the use of nuclear weapons, but the immorality of their possession, thereby clearing the road to nuclear abolition. It was a signal of a major shift in official Catholic teaching that set the stage for the Church's support for the TPNW. I'm not sure that this very significant move was sufficiently noticed. I remember asking over and over again if that really was the intention, to move beyond deterrence, and was reassured that it was. So as a permanent observer state at the United Nations, the Holy See participated actively in the negotiation of the TPNW and was among 122 states that voted in favor of its adoption. Archbishop Paul Gallagher, the Secretary for Relations with States of the Holy See, signed the TPNW when it opened for signatures on the September 20th in 2017, and that same day deposited the Holy See's instrument of ratification, making, as Russell said, the Holy See the first state to ratify that treaty. Then, a few months later, in November 2017, during a private audience with Nobel laureates, including ICANN, and those of us, including many of you that I can see on this meeting, who were participants in a major Vatican conference on nuclear disarmament, Pope Francis definitively condemned the very possession of nuclear weapons. Since then, the Vatican, particularly the Secretary of State and the Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development, have continued to press for nuclear disarmament, encouraging Catholic bishops' conferences around the world, but most particularly in the nuclear states, to support the Holy See's position. And they have also been working with Catholic universities and Catholic organizations to organize and to reiterate support for Pope Francis' message. For example, in September of 2019, and the Vatican Secretary of State himself, Cardinal Parolin, hailed the TPNW as, quote, an important step toward a nuclear weapons-free world, and encouraged all signatory states to ratify it as soon as possible. Again, in 2019, during his visit to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Pope Francis repeated his condemnation of the use and the very possession of nuclear weapons as immoral, and specifically argued for support of the TPNW. During the high-level segment of the UN Conference on Disarmament this past February, Archbishop Gallagher repeated the Vatican's belief that a world free of nuclear weapons is both possible and necessary. He said that this conviction, reinforced by the entry into force of the TPNW, is also embodied in the spirit of the NPT, of the Treaty on Non-Proliferation, refusing the excuse of some nuclear states, including my own, the United States, including the excuse that some states, including my own, have used to reject the TPNW process altogether. He pointed out that the TPNW and the NPT are, quote, driven by the very same moral imperatives and objectives. They mutually reinforce and complement each other, demonstrating how zealous the desire for peace, security, and stability truly is. Intensifying its efforts through the Vatican COVID-19 Commission in the last year and a half during the pandemic, and in a very powerful effort to promote deep global transformation in a new post-pandemic normal, which Pope Francis speaks about over and over again, the Vatican has actually called for general and complete disarmament under effective systems of control and verification. It's fascinating. I'm not sure that we've lifted up clearly enough what the Vatican has been saying. Archbishop Gallagher made that specific point during the same speech last February, and in March, the dicastery itself hosted a major event entitled Advancing Integral Disarmament in Times of Pandemic, to promote a global ceasefire in support of the UN Secretary General's pleas and to stop the production and proliferation of weapons. So the Vatican over the last few years has both moved its position on deterrence and even the possession of nuclear weapons, and has spoken out more and more forcefully about the disgrace of spending fortunes, not only on refurbishing nuclear weapons, but on the production of weapons and the marketing and trafficking in weapons all over the world. So a little bit about the Vatican. Now a bit about Pax Christi. And I have to start by saying Pax Christi in England and Wales clearly lead the way in our network, our global network on this issue. Pax Christi International, as you know, has been working for nuclear disarmament since we were founded over 75 years ago. Like you, we are strongly supportive of the TPNW and every other move toward abolition. We're very active members of ICANN, and our teams at the UN, particularly in New York, but bringing in representatives from other sections around the world, were very active in the negotiation of the TPNW, and we continue to be active in promoting the ratification of the treaty. Pax Christi International gathers a nuclear disarmament working group, which includes representatives from countries around the world, wherever Pax Christi has members involved in this issue, in order to develop a common strategy, to develop common resources, but also to support what are the necessarily regional and country-specific initiatives wherever our members are located. Right now, our common strategy is to promote the ratification of the TPNW and many of our sections in different countries. And I want to single out our Pax Christi in the Philippines as having a really wonderful impact on the movement of their countries toward ratification. Among Pax Christi sections in Europe, including in England and Wales, Scotland, Germany, Belgium, Italy, France, and the Netherlands, many have been looking at where there might be openings to get nuclear weapons off European soil. And in the United States, we have been trying to move to smaller but real steps toward nuclear disarmament, beginning with our support for the Back from the Brink campaign, which, for example, supports a no first use commitment and an end to the massive expenditures that are programmed for the refurbishing and development of nuclear weapons in the next few years. Most Pax Christi sections are working with cities, with mayors, with legislative bodies, as well as with educational programs and social media campaigns to raise grassroots engagement in this issue. And many of us are supporting the disinvestment efforts like Don't Bank on the Bomb, which was actually initiated by our Dutch member organization, Pax, in the Netherlands. Looking into the future in terms of the Vatican and nuclear disarmament, I have to say that I am hopeful. Pope Francis has pretty well solidified a Catholic position against the very possession of nuclear weapons. I think the Holy See will continue that position and will look for ways to promote the abolition of nuclear weapons as a moral imperative into the future. I also believe that the Holy See will more and more encourage the development of practical measures to make that possible and of a global ethic that would make the realistic abolition of nuclear weapons reality. Practical measures will include, for example, the Holy See's support for what they're already calling for, which are new technologies to enhance the reliability of verification measures, and for concrete actions during the review session of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty in accordance, they say, with our joint intention to achieve at the earliest possible date the cessation of the nuclear arms race and to undertake effective measures in the direction of nuclear disarmament. The Vatican, I believe, will always support the tireless recourse to negotiation, mediation, and arbitration that Pope Francis repeats over and over and over again, and articulated so clearly in his latest encyclical, Fratelli Tutti. On a more comprehensive level, though, our engagement as Pax Christi with the Vatican through our Catholic Nonviolence Initiative has convinced me that Pope Francis is moving the institutional Catholic Church toward a paradigmatic shift that will replace the just war tradition that has been at the center of church teaching on violence and war for 1,500 years, with a global practical ethic built on nonviolence. In Fratelli Tutti, Pope Francis moved the just war tradition to a back shelf in the Vatican, literally saying, quote, with increased globalization, what might appear as an immediate or practical solution for one part of the world initiates a chain of violent and often latent effects that end up harming the entire planet and opening the way to new and worse wars in the future. During the November 2017 Vatican Conference on Nuclear Disarmament, Bishop Robert McElroy from San Diego in the United States said, the church is in the midst of a fundamental reappraisal of how to balance the Christian obligation to nonviolence with the need to resist evil in the world. The traditional norms of just war, particularly jus ad bellum, increasingly appear to be incapable of effectively constraining violence in the modern world. The power of nonviolence, once relegated to the category of romantic idealism, has emerged as a potent force for social transformation and the building of lasting peace. We shall see. Thank you.